Well, for more insight into the meeting and bilateral relations between the U.S. and China, we're joined by Paul Bledsoe, president of strategic public policy firm Bledsoe Associates. Welcome back to the show, Paul.
Hi, Rachelle. Nice to see you again.
So let's start by looking at the progress. In your view, what are the most notable changes since the signing of the Paris Accord?
Well, I was just returned from San Francisco in the Clean Energy Ministerial, where 30 countries, including China and the United States, had their energy ministers hashing out how they're going to actually adopt the policies and deploy the technologies to reduce emissions. That kind of hard work is what it's going to take now. I think this is a good step in the right direction today out of Beijing. I think Prime Minister Modi will be here at the White House tomorrow. I know he and President Obama will be discussing climate change. So the top emitters around the world are finally confronting the need to reduce emissions, but there's a lot more to be done.
So we really are seeing momentum, but as you said, a lot more still to be done. What would you like to see happen?
Well, there are a whole host of areas. Let me talk about two or three. One would be a phase out of hydrofluorocarbons, HFCs, which are super greenhouse gases used as chemicals in refrigeration and air conditioning. We now have replacement chemicals, and later this year, if we phase them out under a different treaty called the Montreal Protocol Treaty, as China now supports, as does India and the United States and many other countries, we would reduce warming by a full degree Fahrenheit in this century. That's the kind of action we've got to take immediately, because the economic costs of climate change are mounting too. The World Bank released a study just a few weeks ago finding that the GDP of North Africa and the Middle East will be reduced by 6% because of water shortages, just because of water shortages caused by climate change over the next 30 years. These are huge economic questions.
So then, with that being said, do you think things are actually on track to ratify this statement, or are things really not moving fast enough then?
I think we will ratify the Paris Agreement this year. It takes 55 nations representing 55% of global emissions, which means China, the U.S. and EU are absolutely critical. I believe all of them will approve the treaty, the agreement rather, this year. That being said, there are other things we've got to do. China is in the midst of financing or building over 100 regular, very emitting coal plants, not supercritical efficient coal, but old style coal all around the world. They should really look at reducing that and getting in an agreement by the U.S. and the OECD countries to only finance, if you must finance coal, only finance the most efficient so-called supercritical coal plants. For the United States, we have got to begin investing not only in clean energy domestically, but around the world. And that starts with major investments in China, India, Brazil, Indonesia, and other major developing countries.
Now, Paul, with that being said, how is the pace of investment in clean energy tech, both for China and the U.S. at the moment?
It's growing remarkably. We were talking about it is growing by hundreds of billions of dollars every year. In the last 5 years, it has grown by that much every year. We're talking about a $5 trillion global market. This is probably the biggest single economic sector to emerge since the information technology boom. It is that large. We are probably going to be leaving at least half of the fossil fuels on this earth in the ground. We're not going to use them, because if we do use them, we're going to destabilize the climate and destabilize entire countries, cause huge immigration problems, droughts, famines. It's really a biblical storm. You know, the final thing I'll say is when I met with world leaders in San Francisco last week, they're very concerned about Donald Trump. There's a big concern that his rhetoric is just absolutely irresponsible. He's called climate change a hoax generated by the Chinese. These are ridiculous statements. I don't believe Donald Trump will be president because he is deranged and dangerous.
Now, Paul, I do want to get to something in terms of the people who are actually leading the way, people who are acknowledging what's happening with climate change. We also see Norway is actually trying to remove all fossil fuel-based cars in the next decade. In terms of some of the lessons that both the China and the US can learn from some of these really progressive countries, what do you think are some of the big takeaways?
Well, one of the key things we have to do is reduce all three types of fossil fuels. So that would be coal, the most carboniferous of the fossil fuels, natural gas, and oil. Oil is going to be the hardest to eradicate. About 95% of global transportation runs on oil. So what we have to do is move toward electrification of vehicles, of transportation, which is happening around the world. Tesla and many others are producing, thousands and hundreds of thousands and now millions of cars. But we can't produce the electricity with coal. We have to have electricity come from renewable and other clean sources. So we have to get at each sector to really drive down emissions.
Right.
One final thing we're probably going to use, one technology, that's called carbon capture and storage. What we're probably going to do is retrofit existing coal plants around the world and then natural gas plants and capture the CO2 and bury it underground or use it for new products.
It sounds expensive, but obviously necessary if we're supposed to take care of the future. Thank you so much. We'll have to leave it there. Paul Bledsoe from Bledsoe Associates.
My pleasure.
If you like what you just saw, follow us on social media and visit our website, CCTV-America.com.